name's Tim Westbrook, and I am the host of the I Love Being Sober podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to provide educational content for people that are struggling with addiction, parents, spouses, family members, and friends of people that may or may not want to get clean and sober. Anybody else, and to anybody else that's just interested in learning a little bit more about what successful recovery looks like. I am joined today by Melissa Killeen. Melissa is an established recovery coach, author, and lecturer. Melissa has more than 30 years experience in personal recovery and well over a decade as a recovery coach. Melissa is continually active in service to the 12-step community, teaching recovery coaching certification courses, training other recovery coaches how to effectively run their business, and speaking at national treatment conferences about coaching, recovery residences, and so on. Melissa has 2 master's degrees from the University of Pennsylvania in organizational dynamics and executive coaching. Melissa managed the startup of the second recovery community organization, the Living Proof Recovery Center in Voorhees, New Jersey. Melissa was a past president and executive board member of Recovery Coaches International, an international association of recovery coaches. Melissa is recipient of the 2015 Vernon Johnson Award from the Faces of and Voices of Recovery in Washington, D.C. She is a nationally certified recovery support practitioner and a recovery coach trainer with DAR. Melissa lives in Southern New Jersey. Melissa, welcome to the show. So good to see you. I'm really excited about this, and I met you a couple years ago at the West Coast Symposium in Palm Springs, right? And you were on the recovery.
I think it was a year ago. It was just a year ago.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah, time flies.
Yeah, and I really loved what you had to say. You sent me a copy of your book and about recovery coaching, and you're just considered to be one of the pioneers of recovery coaching. I guess you've been doing it for a long time, and so yeah, I'm really just excited to talk with you about recovery coaching, how you got to where you are today, why you're passionate about recovery coaching. And there are lots of people out there that think that a recovery coach is the same thing as a sponsor, which you and I know that's not true. So we're going to talk about that. So this is good. Welcome.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's tell me a little bit about you and kind of your journey to recovery.
Well, you got to go back a ways. So I have over 30 years in AA and NA. And when I lost my job during the subprime mortgage crisis, and now we're in another recession, but that was like the first recession in 2008, I decided to go back to school and get a new degree. And I really enjoyed working with executive coaches in my job. So I decided to take a course there in that field to see whether I liked it, to see whether it fit. And the first course, I felt like I was at home. And so part of this losing my job during the subprime mortgage crisis, I was fortunate enough to have a severance package, and I paid for my first semester from part of that severance package. And I remember going to my first, going to an AA meeting in Philadelphia at the William Way Center. And I was with a friend, and again, many of us change our careers in recovery. And he was going through the same thing. He was changing his career. And we walked out of that AA meeting and we said, those people are having a hard time balancing life and recovery and family. They really need somebody to help them with all of those things, with business, life, family, and recovery. And so he looked at me and he said, yeah, they need a recovery coach. And it was the first time I had ever heard that term, but he knew what I was going to pen for, executive coaching, and he was going for to be a therapist.
Right.
So we were kind of moving in the same field, clinical treatment. And that's when the light bulb, you know, the cartoon with the light bulb goes off over your head. I said, because the executive coaching was great, but it just didn't float my boat to make me so excited. But as soon as I saw people in the rooms who were going back and forth, how do I balance work? How do I balance family? How do I balance recovery? Especially, this is way beyond the wheelbase of a sponsor. Way beyond. A sponsor is not going to be able to talk about how to adjust to work, how to adjust to family, how to adjust to recovery, and get those three working like gears in mesh. But an executive coach is trained to do that. So I said,
okay, so let's I want to back up. First, I want to talk about, okay, when did you first get sober?
So I've got a period of a few recovery dates. So the May 5th, 1989 is my alcohol and drug recovery date. Then I quit smoking, and that was in 2000. And then also I am a sex addict, and I've been sober in sex and love addiction since October 14th, 2004. So
okay.
I have a lot of addictions.
Yeah, and hey, you're not alone. There's a lot of other people that have their issues, and the first one that pops up is alcohol, and then after they get, and then these other ones.
Yeah.
And so I guess
how it happens.
my point is that like you and I both, like the 12 steps is what got me clean and sober. And I have a sponsor. I had a sponsor. I did that thing, and I believe in that. Me, however, recovery coaching is completely different. So about, let's spend just a couple minutes talking about your 12-step journey. That's been helpful in you clean and sober.
Yes, and service, I should say, has also kept me very sober. And I really want to emphasize service, because if it wasn't for the time that I was dedicating to the intergroups and the regional offices, so I stopped spending time doing the addiction, mm-hmm. and I spent time doing service. And I also, and this is unusual, but I stepped back from being a sponsor for a couple of years because I'm too much of a rescuer. So I needed to focus on me. And so I didn't sponsor other people until my 5th year in the program. And then I felt I had enough of stability in alcohol, substance misuse, and the behavioral addictions that I could sponsor someone. But now I don't sponsor anyone. I avoid that because I don't take them through the steps as a recovery coach. So I'm really not adept at that. I'm adept at being a coach. And so I find if I'm a sponsor to someone, I'm not going to do the steps with them. I can verbally recite the steps and the concepts, but I'm not going to go through a step workbook with them. It's just not how I work. So now I don't sponsor anyone, but I still do service.
Right. And then did the 12 steps help you get sober?
Absolutely. Every year, I think for 12 years, I went to a step retreat and did the steps, all 12 of them in one weekend. And that was tremendous for my recovery, tremendous. And now I go to that same retreat every other year, and I augment it with another program retreat. So every year I go to a retreat of some sort, and that's my tune-up time.
Gotcha. Okay. And so then fast forward, you went back to school. You had the mortgage crisis, the depression, trying to figure out what you're going to do next and relate to that. And, you know, the light bulb moment when you wanted to get into recovery coaching. And so let's talk about let's continue talking about recovery coaching and how that kind of evolved you.
Well, when that light bulb went off, I was in the process of deciding whether I was going to do this as a degree. And so I revised my concept of writing the master's thesis and turned it into basically a history of recovery coaching. And I remember I told you that when I first started researching recovery coaching, it was around 2000 and actually it was around 2004, and it was 13 hits on Google, and now it's like 13 million. So I really spent a lot of time researching my capstone, which is the master's thesis, by talking one-on-one with people, talking one-on-one with William White, talking one-on-one with Phil Valentine, talking one-on-one with John Shinholzer. These are really people who have started recovery coaching, and you call me one of those foundational people. These people are foundational people.
Well,
have been doing it a long time.
Yeah, Bill White's like the Bill W of recovery coaching.
Right. And he is Bill W.
Right, he is Bill W. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I was very fortunate to have the opportunity of speaking to him as I developed. I actually wrote 2 master's theses on recovery coaching, and these theses became the foundation of the book. Mm-hmm. So I was able to really get an idea of the history of recovery coaching, how it started, and that it just didn't start in this century. It started with the Indians, the American Indians, and they had very much a tribal consensus in which they get together, and one mentor works with another person that's struggling with alcoholism and brings them to the group to discuss and works with them one-on-one, helping them process the recovery program. And this is one of the very, very interesting aspects that I find for me to be a recovery coach, is that this is not a contemporary concept. This is a concept that's been around for 200 years. The contemporary aspect of it is, that we're working with rock musicians and soccer moms and CEOs, and instead of, tribal individuals, tribal members. So it's very interesting. And Bill White taught me about the history of recovery coaching and how long it's been around. And then once I wrapped up these 2 theses, the interesting part is the second part of my master's degree was I had to go out and be a recovery coach. It was like going for your PhD, although they don't call it a PhD at University of Penn. I had to do a practicum. So for 2 years, I had to work with clients and then report back to my advisor and form this final dissertation. And that was eye-opening. Because he was one-on-one with me. He was a doctor and had his first job was working at a treatment center with alcoholics in Pennsylvania. So he really knew what was going on with treatment. And that is what got me on the path. And so I worked with business owners that were heavily involved with substance misuse, but still were functional in running a successful business. And so we, again, looked at the whole business, family, recovery, and tried to work everything together and see what aspect was extremely triggering, see what aspect we could work on as far as minimizing the triggers, and then also work on understanding what prompted some of those triggers. And I'm not talking about early childhood trauma. I'm talking about, gee, I really don't like this kind of personality. And every time I have to meet with this person who has this personality, I need a drink, and in order to come down from that. So we would work together in how to work with difficult people. Instead of going home, we would then talk about going into a meditation before we got into our car. Before we got into our car to drive past that liquor store to get us home. So these are all tools that we felt were very important and very different for a business person. And the approach was very different because many times we had our meetings at the business. Many times we interviewed administrative assistants and vice presidents and people who worked very closely with these individuals. And so it was, gave me the foundation of how a recovery coach should work. Because at the time, there wasn't anything developed like what I was doing. So I had to develop my own model. And that's really why I wrote the book, because there's many models of recovery that treatment centers utilize, but there's really no model for recovery coaches and how they work with business people. There's an excellent recovery coach plan that 𝐒𝐔𝐁𝐒𝐿 Foundation has written. And I advise that for many people. And that's terrific to work one-on-one. But I needed to figure out, how do I work business, family, and recovery? So it was an interesting process of developing that concept.
And so what is the difference? So you have a sponsor who typically takes somebody through the steps, and it's mostly like related to drug, alcohol, and living an honest life and doing amends and so forth. But my experience is that for a person to be successful in recovery, their entire life to change. New eating habits, new habits, exercise habits. In business, like their behavior, like maybe they lie, they cheat, they steal, they manipulate. But you've got a business owner, you've got anybody else for that matter. How do they change their behavior in these other areas of their life to be conducive to their recovery? Because we all want long-term recovery, but it's short-lived if stopping drinking and stopping doing drugs is and the 12 steps for that matter. I mean, there's way more to it than than just the 12 steps.
Yes, there's way more to it. And to quote Bill W., there's many pathways to recovery. So I'm a huge advocate of trying as much as I can and using what works. And so the first concept is the concept that that person has to embrace what we're doing. And opening up the avenue of business, everyone's in business and wants that business to succeed. It takes them some time to recognize that everyone in that business knows that they're drinking. That's the misnomer that goes through everyone's head. So that's often, as soon as we open up that concept to them, then through motivational interviewing, we can show the discrepancies of their behavior and how it's detrimental to their business. And because they're so motivated to make their business move forward, the motivation to stop drinking or stop using is coupled. Now, the problem is the reason that they're using stress management. And this is where meditation and this is where tapping comes in. I utilize tapping quite frequently. And this is where it's mandatory for my clients to see a therapist on a weekly basis and to get a social evaluation from a psychiatrist to see if there's any kind of depression, anxiety, any need for medication. So then I have some team, a team to work with, a psychiatrist and a therapist, that we can formulate a concept of how we can minimize the stress. And as I said before, I'm not dealing with the early childhood trauma, but I want to know if there is early childhood trauma that's affecting this person today in causing them to use. So then we can focus on skills and tools to minimize that trauma. And that's essentially, when I use tapping, that's one of the best tools that I use. Also, when we're looking at the aspects of family, there's family systems and there's business systems. And when you look at the two systems, they're almost exactly alike. Most of the time, and I don't want to get gender specific, but the administrative assistant is your spouse. Then the people who work under you are your children. And that's how you treat them. So then you take that home and you treat everybody the same way. And then you bring it back and you treat everybody the same way. So aspects of what I do is, through various personality assessments, distinguish the difference between these people and reintroduce the user, the recovery, to the aspects of this person's personality that works the best for both of them. He might have a very, very data-driven administrative assistant, and he may have a very sympathetic home buddy wife. But he's always treating the wife like the administrative assistant, so there's always a clash. So through the personality assessments that I would do with the family and the close work colleagues, is reintroduce the executive and say, this is what this person is really good at. This is what this person is really good at. And you know what your wife is really good at? And the reason that you keep getting those clashes with your wife is that you keep confusing her with your administrative assistant. And they're two different people. And so that's a business tool from executive coaching that I've brought into recovery coaching because it's very important. And I do it with the executive, the recovery that I'm working with. Many times they have no idea what they're good at. Many times they've been forced into a business situation that they hate. And that's why they're drinking. So it evolves, and it's different for everybody. But through this evolution, several things come out. One, I'm not going to recover. I'm going to continue drinking. Two, I'm going to go into treatment. Three, I'm really not happy with my business. I'm going to either step down or sell it. And then the fourth one is that they embrace recovery and embrace rebuilding the business. And often that happens after they make a decision to go into inpatient treatment and or an outpatient treatment program. So there's a lot of ways that we'd like it to end, but it's all client driven. It's just, all right, well, that didn't work. Let's try this. All right, let's try this. And we keep going and going and going and keep trying. And sometimes we double back and try it again.
Everybody's path is different.
Everybody's.
So you mentioned tapping. Tell us what tapping is.
So tapping is touching certain points of your face and body that are actually acupressure sensitive points. And you go through a script or a series of comments in order to alleviate any stress that you're feeling. It can be utilized for insomnia. It can be utilized for overeating. It can be utilized for anxiety. I started using it with a person who had panic attacks. So it's a way of calming someone down, and it takes about 15 to 20 minutes to go through a tapping exercise that you can take someone from an incredibly anxiety-riddled state down to calmness. And it also has, there's another technique that you can work on inner child work with an individual. And so, and that's really very interesting as well. So there's many practitioners that are out there. I recommend just Google tapping, and you'll find many people who are doing tapping, having online seminars, and training people for tapping. It just so happens that here in Philadelphia, we have one of the best tapping instructors in the nation, Karen Davidson, and she is also a matrix imprinter instructor. So we tend to use it a lot in this area, but it's all over.
Yeah. Okay, so you had the light bulb moment, and you realized that recovery coaching is what you wanted to do, and then you started down that path. And why? And so why are you so passionate about recovery today? I mean, it's expanded, it's continued to evolve over time, and you're still passionate about it. You're still speaking about it. You're writing your second book about it. Why are you so passionate about recovery coaches and the process and their role in the process of recovery?
I've seen it work. And that's what's so terrific about it. After I graduated from Penn, I was working in an outpatient clinic that was pretty much like a Medicare, Medicaid for low-income families and drug court. And so that's where they developed the first recovery coaching organization, the RCO, Living Proof Center. And that's when I was able to really see the connection between outpatient or inpatient treatment and recovery coaching. You know, that letting someone out the door and saying, see ya, with a 12-step pamphlet on meetings in our area is like pushing them off a diving board and they don't know how to swim. And so it was so fundamental for me to get this program up and running, because as William White said, people were falling through this gap. 80% of the people who were leaving treatment centers were relapsing within the first 60 days. And out of that 80%, you know, half of them were relapsing in the first month. So they needed, you know, to be grabbed and just guided. This is where your first meeting is. Let me go with you. This is how you do it. You got $1, you know, you put that in the basket. You want to read here, you know, this pamphlet, that pamphlet, you can order this book. AA not for you, maybe adult children might be good for you. Or, you know, maybe you want to look at Marijuana's Anonymous instead of NA meetings. So there's a lot of variables, and doing it alone is difficult for someone who has no experience in the 12-step rooms.
It's like, it's impossible. It's almost impossible. I mean, it's really, to your point, I mean, in the way I thought it is, when somebody's in treatment, they're in a bubble.
Right.
Bubble, they're completely protected, no triggers, no outside world, no relationships. They don't have to go to work. They don't have to find a job. They don't, like, really, they're told what to do. They're told when to wake up. Their meals are served. They go to therapy, they go to treatment, they do yoga. Like there is pretty much out for them. And to your point, it's like, okay, go to AA, get a sponsor, work the steps. You know, that's kind of that's the extent of the guidance, because once a treatment center is done, a treatment center is done. And it's like, people need an integration process, and to have a guide, to have a coach, and it's not, you know, they still need to find a sponsor, right? They need to find a sponsor. If you decide to go to AA, like for me, I was lucky. I went to AA, I got a sponsor, I found the right meetings, I found the meetings where I connected with people, and you know, I was really, really lucky. But for the person that goes to an AA meeting, they go to the wrong AA meeting, they don't see the similarities. It's not, you know, there's just so many things that can happen. To your point, a coach, let's try out Adult Children of Alcoholics. Let's try out Refuge Recovery. Let's try out Celebrate Recovery. Let's try out Cocaine Anonymous. Hey, you know what? I think let's find this meeting. This meeting has more people that are your age, or whatever, you know?
Right. And that's what a sponsor cannot do. If you find a sponsor in AA, he is not going to suggest you go to Refuge Recovery, the Buddhist recovery program. Right. If you have a propensity towards gambling and drinking, he's not going to help you in Gamblers Anonymous. Whereas a sponsor travels through all of those and can guide someone from meeting to meeting to meeting and say, yeah, I understand. They're all 20-year-olds with piercings. I understand you don't like that meeting. Let's go to this meeting. It's a little further away, but it's all older people, you know, and go through those kind of discussions and understand that the individual makes those choices to return over and over again. So making it as comfortable as possible for the individual to walk in and have that experience we all have. This is where I belong. That's what's going to bring them back. And once they feel they can belong, then they can find somebody who has what they want. So it's many, AA is great. AA, you know, you walk in, you're a newcomer, you get 6 names, 6 phone numbers before the end of the meeting. They've got it down pat. There's not another 12-step program I have seen that does that. at least the ones I've gone to, and I've gone to all of them, you know, in
Right.
certain regions. I haven't gone to every single one in every single state in the country, but
Well,
that's difficult for someone to walk in and not have any kind of connection.
well, and even, I mean, it's like there are lots of AA meetings and different. They all have a kind of a population, a different graphic, and I've seen somebody go, if a person goes to the, I guess, the wrong meeting, the meeting that they don't feel comfortable with, they might not ever go back. If
To
they
any
ask
AA meeting, to any AA meeting.
any
Right.
AA meeting or NACA
Right.
or thing, if they find a sponsor, so they're new to a 12-step program, they find a sponsor and they don't resonate with that sponsor, they're going to say, you know what, I tried AA, I tried NA, it doesn't work. And really, it's like the coach has the relationship. The coach is not going to let them just, it's like, okay, let's find another meeting. Let's find another sponsor. Let's keep this thing going. Because you and I both know that they've got to stay connected to recovery or some sort of a recovery program, because environment, the people you surround yourself with, that's like community. That's the only way for somebody to stay clean and sober, is if they have a community of people that are doing the same thing, that want the same thing, that have the same values, the same morals, the same ethics.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And also, many individuals are afraid to walk into that room because of whatever. They'll see a neighbor, somebody will recognize them, they're shamed. So having a recovery coach walk into a meeting with them that first time is a tremendous amount of support and a way of showing them how it works. And it can be very helpful long term. I spend a lot of time in my coaching spending the first weekend with an individual post-discharge, if they're discharged and they go home. And those first 3-4 meetings that we go to, you can just feel the fear. And by the end of that weekend, that person is comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's shift, actually not really a shift, but let's talk about the role of a recovery coach in a sober living home. Sober living home, treatment center. Tell me about the role of a recovery coach in those.
Well, again, this is really one of the biggest reasons that I had to change my book, because the role that I was dealing with was that boundary was starting to get blurred. The treatment centers now were establishing their own outpatient programs. And then they were also establishing their own recovery residences. So someone could stay on a campus of a treatment center and go to an outpatient program and move into a sober home, and then process through the different stages of outpatient treatment. And that's where coaches played an important part, because each part of those shifts, you were talking about how safe they were in inpatient, how protected they were, the safety and the cocoon that they were in. You break someone out of that and they become very vulnerable. And many times that vulnerability is enough of a trigger to relapse, whether they're going home or whether they're going into an outpatient program and into a recovery residence. So many times having a coach go through all of those boundaries with that person is extremely helpful, and is the one stable aspect that that individual has from inpatient treatment to final discharge. And that could be, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, sometimes even longer, depending on what kind of facilities are available. And then another thing is that the industry for recovery residences, and you know what this is all about, just baboomed. And what I was seeing is that it just wasn't Oxford House anymore. And that these house managers needed some information as to how to communicate to people, how to work with people. And then that was so successful. And I always advocate that house managers have recovery coaching backgrounds, but it turns into such a success. And this is what you're experiencing, that now people really are relying on recovery coaching, and the managers of the recovery residences, they have to buy food, they have to take care of the house, they have to make sure that all of the meetings are scheduled and the van gets serviced and where it's going. So they've got other things to do than be a recovery coach. And so more and more houses are hiring 2 or 3 recovery coaches to work with their clients. And many inpatient programs are offering the same thing, tele-recovery coaching, where a person goes home and goes into an outpatient program at their home, but they stay in contact with a recovery coach that's affiliated with the treatment center, because they know the recovery plan, they know the recovery model that they used at the treatment center. They know what that person has written up for their own personal recovery plan, and they want them to adhere to it. So that is another aspect of recovery coaching. And then not to mention how many recovery coaches are out there as far as just individuals that need extra help and say, I can't do this alone. I'm going to just call up a recovery coach. So those aspects of recovery coaches have really expanded beyond just being a recovery coach, working with someone being discharged in a treatment center. It's much beyond.
Yeah, and I've seen, it's like that the house manager. A lot of times, the house managers they're in recovery, like 99 out of 100. They're in, actually
Right.
probably 10 out of 10. They're in recovery, and to your point, they've got other responsibilities. They've got 5, 6, 10 residents at the home. They've got to do the grocery shopping, they prepare meals, they do the drug testing, they're holding clients accountable to work in a 12-step program. If there's the sober living utilizes technology-assisted care, they are double checking the app, making sure the residents are doing their activities. And so for them to be a recovery coach and individualize a plan with like the sober house has goals and the structure and the plan laid out. But my experience is the recovery coach is going to make that house managers a lot easier.
Right.
The recovery coach is going to support the therapist. The recovery is going to support the work that was done at the treatment center. Like the recovery coach, again, it's the wraparound service. Like wherever the person goes, the recovery coach is there to support them.
And that's what I call treatment teams. And bringing in the recovery residence manager is very important, because it also helps that person understand what they have to do. They might have had a dirty urine. They might have come home late. consistently. And the recovery coach needs to know this. So communication with the recovery residence manager is very important. And then, of course, the therapist, and if there's a psychiatrist. And what if there's a legal consequence to the addiction? Then we're talking to a probation officer. We may be talking to a lawyer with HIPAA letters of authorization to discuss this person's case. Many times we can have a conference call with 4 or 5 people on it and discuss one client. And it's very, very fruitful, very fruitful. And in case in point, a recovery coach is not the person driving the bus. The recovery coach is the person that sees the recovery the most. The person who gives the professional, the clinicians, all of the information they need. And it's the treatment team, either the clinician or the psychiatrist, that develop the treatment plan. And then the recovery coach follows it. And that's what's very important. There's a huge amount of recovery coaches out there that are driving their own bus, that have no communication with the therapist at all. And that's very difficult because they have no idea what the therapist is telling that client. And it's important that the two of them match exactly, because you don't want that client confused. And so it's very important to develop these treatment team meetings on a regular basis and get your HIPAA authorization letters signed and open up this communication. That's what makes recovery coaching extremely successful.
Team effort.
Team.
The therapist, the recovery coach, the sober living residents, the house manager, like they all have to be on the same page in order to be truly effective in supporting a person, providing them the accountability, the direction, and everything they need to help them achieve their goals.
Right.
So let's talk about your book, the publication of the second edition of the book, Guide to Coaching in Recovery from Addictions.
Well, as I said, the recovery coaches has just boomed. Now, besides recovery coaching, working with recovery residences and treatment centers, now recovery coaches are working in hospitals, working with individuals that have been revived from an opioid overdose and set that person into a pathway of recovery. There's recovery coaches that work in sobering centers, that instead of taking a person that is publicly drunk and disorderly into jail, that many cities have sobering centers, that they take that person into a sobering center and basically they sleep it off for 24 hours. But every hour they're woken up, their vitals are taken, and there's a recovery coach with a mantra. You can stop this. You can seek recovery. This is how you do it. There's recovery coaches working one-on-one with individuals going into prison that are in recovery. How am I going to maintain my recovery as I go through this legal process? And then there's recovery coaches in the prisons working with people that are in recovery in the prisons. And then there's recovery coaches working with people on the reentry process when civilians come out of prison and need a job and need education. And what do they first do? Fall into the same neighborhood that sent them into using in the first place, which most likely complicated their legal situation. So recovery coaching has really expanded tremendously. I added over 100 pages just talking about the ways different recovery coaches now work with their clients. And I dare say this is still going to keep going, because now there's recovery coaches that utilize Kundalini yoga. There's recovery coaches that utilize wilderness excursions. There's recovery coaches that just are just for youth and young adults. There's recovery coaches just for family members. So there's so many different types of recovery coaches. And I wanted to put that into the book to show people that there are just a tremendous amount of variables. When I teach at the college, I teach a recovery coaching certification class. Half of those students, and many times they're what we call not traditional students, not a 20, 21, 22-year-old, but a mature student. And they come in and they say, I've been in recovery a long time. I want to give back. Or they say, I am a mother of someone in recovery. Or they come in and they say, my cousin died, or my brother died, and I want to help. So I found that there was there's just not one person walking in to be a recovery coach, and that person is in recovery themselves. There's a huge, huge group of people that are there. Some are there to be advocates, to learn how to be advocates for recovery. And so it's interesting to see who comes and wants to be a recovery coach. It's fascinating.
Right. Okay, so I guess the next is there anything else that you'd like to share about recovery coaching that you think might be important for people to hear?
Well, what's really been evident from the very start of recovery coaching is that this is a stepping stone. This is a process. Many people who come into recovery and find recovery coaching as something they want to do move into different aspects of the field, the treatment field. You're in recovery residences. I have some people who have gone all the way through being a drug and alcohol counselor to a licensed clinical social worker, and now they're going for their PsyD. And so it's a stepping stone to introduce individuals into the industry. And I like that because it only takes a high school education, and it only takes 64 hours worth of training. And then you are introduced to a field in which you already have excellent experiential knowledge, and it can open up a new career path for you. I have seen many individuals take it and go to become advocates working for Faces and Voices of Recovery, or NAADAC, which is the Association for Drug and Alcohol Counselors. I've seen many people go into teaching. Many times, recovery coaching is the introduction of a new career path for someone who has been down and out, hit bottom, nowhere, nothing to do, no prospects of going back to their old position. And recovery coaches open up this possibility. And now I see recovery coaching, as I said, there's now certification to be a recovery coach, to be a recovery coach for young adults. There's a certification for recovery coaches for families. There's certification for empathetic recovery coaches. That's recovery coaches working with people that are severely impaired. And so with all of these aspects of recovery coaching certification, you become really qualified very, very quickly. Recovery coaching also for crisis situations. And it's just amazing to see these possibilities for someone. Once they move into recovery coaching, they think, oh, I'll work one-on-one with an alcoholic. Well, guess what? You might do great working one-on-one with policemen. You might do better working one-on-one in crisis situations, working with people who have just experienced a mass shooting. You might do better working on one-on-one with families. So this is an opportunity that has opened up that never was there before. And as I said before, it's just going to continue to grow.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really good point. And most of the people that I work in recovery, they bring their own experience. And me, prior to working I didn't work in recovery, and what I did, I wasn't passionate about what I did. It wasn't fulfilling. But for somebody that is interested in getting into the field, and they're passionate about helping other people and making a difference, recovery coaching could be an easy step in that direction. And they, to your point, they already have the experience and knowledge, so they're already kind of moving in that.
You're already good at it.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even tell you how grateful I am that I get to work in recovery, and it's like helping another person is going to help. And I know for you, writing these books and working with families and working with individuals helps you. And so that's the magic in recovery coaching. Melissa, I really enjoy having you today. I learned a lot. How people can find out more about your book. How can they reach you? How can they stay connected to you?
So my website is mkrecoverycoaching.com. They can get in touch with me by typing my name, Melissa Killeen, at MK Recovery Coaching, or simply Google my name and my website pops up. You can also Google Recovery Coaching Guide, and that will get you the book site.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Melissa. I really enjoyed spending time today. Have a good day.
I really appreciate it. Good talking to you, and I hope it doesn't take us another year to get back together.
Absolutely. As soon as things open up again, right?
Right.
Okay, take care.
Take care. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.